Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong, and as you can see, I am joined once again by a good friend of the show, Professor Mohammad Marandi. Thanks so much once again, Professor, for joining me today.
Thank you, Danny. It's always a pleasure being on your show.
Great. Well, I want to hold on. Let me just change this layout. For some reason, it's it has us change. All right, here we go. Sorry about that, everyone. We're working through some tech things right now, but okay, Professor Marandi, we're gonna get started. Hit the like button. Make sure that you do that. That helps boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. So, as you know, Professor Marandi, West Asia is very much in flux. There is a lot going on, and I wanted to begin actually with hold on. Sorry. It looks like I'm gone. Hold on one second. There is something wrong here. Okay.
So this is my fault because
sorry, everyone. We're going through tech issues. Stay on. We are here.
yeah, this because Zoom in Iran, Zoom doesn't work in Iran. I used to think Iran was blocking Zoom, but apparently Zoom doesn't allow Iranians to use this. So you have to use a VPN.
Right.
And my VPN isn't working that well.
Yeah, well, typical for the United States. We always have to blame Iran. Iran's to blame for everything, including the tech issues that we are having now. But we are all set here. So I wanted to actually share something with you, Professor Marandi. So this is what is currently being said by Iran itself. Okay, and here we have that Iran, it is being claimed on Newsweek, is threatening to resume the war. But if we look carefully at what is being said here, I wanted your comments on this because I think it's important. Major General Mohammad Pakpour, commander of the IRGC, said forces are fully prepared to resume combat from exactly where it had stopped. And this was during a meeting with Iran's army chief, General Amir Hatami. What I wanted to ask you, Professor Marandi, about this is what is the situation right now with regard to Iran in war preparations? We've heard many times since the cessation of hostilities that Iran's fingers on the trigger, that the next war could be Israel's last. But what is your assessment of the overall situation right now?
The Iranians are preparing themselves. They know that the Israeli regime is dishonest and deceitful, and so is the regime in Washington. They are deceitful. We saw that last time around. The United States, by its own admission, was pretending to negotiate with Iran, but it was secretly preparing for an assault against Iran, and therefore, that's very good reason why the Iranians should be prepared for anything. At the same, also we see that the Israeli regime, the Americans, they tore up their own ceasefire agreement in Gaza. The Israeli regime, on a daily basis, violates the ceasefire in Lebanon. They just murdered a husband and wife yesterday, leaving a small girl as an orphan. We saw what they did in Syria unprovoked, even though Jolani or Shara was kissing the ring. They attacked Syria unprovoked. They actually, as I see it, and I said this yesterday as well, that I believe that after there was an agreement between the Israelis and Jolani, and the Turks were mediating, and in Azerbaijan and elsewhere they had negotiations. The Republic of Azerbaijan, another close ally of the Israeli regime, and the Israelis gave them the green light to go into Soeda. And my belief is that when they went in, the Israelis sort of ambushed them. The intention was to strike them, to let them come in and strike them. And I think what the Israelis are trying to do is they're trying to balkanize Syria. So when you see them carrying out unprovoked attacks against Syria, unprovoked attacks against Iran, violating the ceasefire in Lebanon, a ceasefire that they requested during the war with Hezbollah. They requested the ceasefire. And then the same with Gaza, then obviously the Iranians know that the regime can attack anytime it wants, and the entire West will support it. You will not see condemnation. They'll say the Israeli regime has the right to defend itself. That's what the Europeans will say. That's what the Americans say. No matter what they do, who they kill, what sort of massacres they carry out, no matter how long the genocide or the Holocaust in Gaza continues, the Americans, the Europeans will say Israel has the right to defend itself. So Iran is preparing itself for another round. It doesn't mean it will necessarily happen, but the Iranians are working based on the assumption that it will happen.
Yeah, very, very understandable there, Professor Marandi. Now, I wanted your opinion on this and your assessment on this, because there's a lot of hubris coming out of the United States, the collective West, but particularly, and usually the one with the most hubris is Israel. And here's the Jerusalem Post, what they are saying. The Middle East post-Iran era has begun, no matter how hard the Islamic regime denies it. So I just want to show that this is the Jerusalem Post. You know, there's been a lot made of this, Professor Marandi, a lot made. There have been talks about how, you know, not only has Iran been weakened by the first round with Israel, that it launched this war of aggression that Israel and the U.S. launched, but that everybody else is weakened as well. What is your assessment of the overall situation? Because you mentioned Syria. It is not a good situation in Syria, of course. But what's your assessment of this broader situation as Israel thumps its chest and says, we've actually defeated everybody and Iran has already lost?
Well, I think that the only arena where the Israelis scored a success was in Syria. That was a tactical victory. The Israelis and Erdogan and Biden and the Qataris, of course, they collaborated together to bring down Syria. And they were doing that since 2011. And if Syria hadn't fallen, if we didn't have the dirty war since 2011, the Israeli regime would be in a much more difficult situation today. That's obvious. So it's not the doing what happened over the past few months. It's what's been going on since 2011. Unfortunately, many people across the region and beyond the region, they were fooled by Western propaganda. They were fooled by oil-rich, gas-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, and Erdogan, and they were pushed towards sectarian. They supported these groups basically based on sectarian grounds, many. And now we're seeing the result. What we were predicting back then is that ISIS and Al Qaeda, which is supported by the West, which is backed by the West, which was started by Obama, Timber Sycamore, for example, and which was being pushed by U.S. proxies and allies in the region, it's not in the interest of the Syrian people. But some people who support and who oppose the United States in Gaza, they were supporting U.S. policy in Syria for well over a decade. And now we're seeing the results. We're seeing this so-called revolution demolish the country. Everything that we predicted would happen is happening. If you recall, after the overthrow of the Syrian government, I said that this is not going to work well for these people and those people who are supporting this Al Qaeda and ISIS regime. And now we're seeing the results. We're seeing how a Takfiri ideology is going to marginalize the overwhelming majority of the people. Different minorities, moderate Sunnis, Sufis, everyone is going to be marginalized by these people. But their backers, they willingly close their eyes to this reality because they've been indoctrinated, through sectarianism. In unfortunately, some people, their hatred for the Shia and Iran, and this is something that I don't usually talk about, but their hatred towards Iran and the Shia far outweighs their animosity towards Zionism.
Mm.
And it comes from Ibn Taymiyyah and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and these people who have this takfiri ideology. And they since the revolution in Iran, this ideology has been uh, used as a weapon. It used to be very obscure,
Yeah.
but it has been well funded, and it spread. The Americans also, of course, used it in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union, but it was also used to sort of how should I put it, to contain the revolution in Iran, because it was anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and it supported the press. Those were the ideals of the revolution. So they used Wahhabism and Salafism and Takfiri ideology to create hatred towards Iran, and that hatred since the 1980s has been growing and has continued. So, and I often meet people, like, for example, I went to the TRT studio a couple of times in Istanbul, and so, like, I went to the prayer room, and when I went there to pray, and as I was praying, I could tell, like, people were looking at me with contempt. It was clear that they didn't want me there.
Mm.
I was just so, this ideology, and many people don't know, who don't think that they're Salafist or they're influenced by Wahhabi ideology. They are, but they don't quite recognize it. And so, you know this has become a big problem. And so many people supported this sectarian Takfiri group, these, as ISIS and Al Qaeda, because they just wanted Assad out, even though the Iran's support for Assad had nothing to do with his sect. Iran has huge problems with Baku, because Aliyev is an ally of the Israeli regime, but it is a Shia country, and he is, I assume, at least in name, a Shia. So that, for Iran, that's not the point. The point has always been that wherever the empire, the Western Empire, uh, and the Israeli regime are pursuing regime change in Western Asia, then you can be sure that it's not in the interest of the Palestinian people,
Hmm.
whether it's in Gaza or the West Bank or in Jordan or in Egypt or in Lebanon or in Syria. You can be assured that the Americans and the Israelis know what they're doing. And what we're seeing today is the destruction of Syria. And Iran is not present. Iran has not been present for a long time now, but the situation is getting worse. And the images coming out. And so what the Israelis have done is that and the Americans, is that they've brought this extremist group to power, this Takfiri group, and that has created an incentive among many to seek foreign support. And so the Druze, some of them, not all of them, not even most of them, from my understanding, they sought support from the Israeli regime, which is treasonous. There's no doubt about that. But that gave an excuse to the Takfiris to go out against the Druze people. And the images coming out of that city, I mean, there's one clip which I saw where this Takfiri soldier said the first Druze woman that they give, he's going to give as a gift to this sheikh who was standing, or this person, this old man who was speaking out on in the video before him. This is the sort of, this is Takfiri. I mean, it's no better than Zionism. It's supremacist. It's sinister. It sees anyone who doesn't think like themselves as subhuman or worthy of death, worthy of subjugation. And so this Takfiri ideology is ideal for the Balkanization of Syria. It is ideal for the Balkanization of Syria. And that is why they pushed for these Takfiri groups in Syria. Remember, Jake Sullivan said on February the 12th, 2012 to Hillary Clinton that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. The same Al-Qaeda that we're told carried out 9/11. The same Al-Qaeda that they use along with their regional allies, especially Qatar, to destroy Libya. So these, and then we have the evidence is ample. There's a huge amount of evidence. We have John Kerry, who was then the Secretary of State after Hillary Clinton. He said in a leaked audio in the UN building to the so-called Syrian opposition that we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus to put pressure on the Syrian regime, but the forces opposed to us, the Russians and Iranians and so on, they blocked this. So yes, the Israelis have had success, but I don't think that the Israeli regime has had any success any elsewhere. They've had no success in Yemen. They've had no success with Iran. I think it's very clear that if they were winning against Iran in the war, then why were they seeking the ceasefire? And Iran, by the way, initially rejected the ceasefire. It wasn't a ceasefire; it was a cessation of hostilities. But Iran rejected the cessation of hostilities. The Israelis went to the Americans went to a regional, a neighboring country. They put it to Iran. Iran rejected it. And then the Americans gave concessions to Iran. If you recall, I think Trump said this. I think he wasn't supposed to say this, but if you recall, Trump said during that when the cessation of hostility was taking place, he said that Iran can sell its oil to China. I don't know if you remember him saying that.
Yes, I do. And it was pretty circumspect in the sense that the announcement that there was going to be like secondary sanctions on Iran was very unrelated to the 12-day war, but quote unquote the 12-day war. But he just said it right at toward the end. But continue.
Yeah, there were other concessions as well,
Right.
and which since I'm not exactly certain about these things, I don't want to go into it. But this is what Trump said himself. So after that, so some of the concessions had to do with apparently with other issues too, but regional issues. But in any case, as well. But in any case, the point is that Iran was the side that ultimately had to be convinced for a cessation of hostilities. If that's the case, then what sort of victory is that? Or in Yemen, it was Trump who capitulated. If you recall, initially Trump said that Ansarullah, they gave up and they've come begging to end this. And I think he even used the word capitulated. But then it turned out that it was the exact opposite, that it was the American regime, it was the Trump regime that capitulated. In the case of Hezbollah, this is a contentious issue.
Yeah.
First of all, Hezbollah made huge sacrifices for well over a year to draw forces away from Gaza. They made huge sacrifices. And if it wasn't for Hezbollah, who knows what would have happened to Gaza, especially during those initial months. So Hezbollah made huge sacrifices, but ultimately, who sought a ceasefire? It was the Israelis. It was the Israelis. Hezbollah still exists. It is armed. It is prepared. But I don't think that the Israelis can call that a victory. And with regards to Gaza, I don't see that as a victory. I see all of these as failures. Yes, they've murdered many people. Yes, they've murdered many people in Lebanon. Yes, they've murdered many people in Yemen. Yes, they murdered many people in Iran. Of course, they brought Al Qaeda and ISIS to power in Syria, but they have not won. And the region, by the way, Danny, is changing. The region is now seeing an Israeli regime backed by the Trump regime that's out of control. And that is changing the mentality of many countries that are close to the United States in the region. They're fearful for themselves. So countries which were collaborating with Americans, like Turkey was part of this dirty war. They supported these Takfiri groups. They've been behind them all along. And they are responsible for the destruction of Syria alongside Qatar. But Turkey knows that they are vulnerable. Saudi Arabia knows that it's vulnerable. Everyone knows the threat of Netanyahu, who simply wages war whenever he wants. He can carry out airstrikes on Syria out of the blue. He can tomorrow. Would you be surprised if he's bombing Beirut? Of course not. If he starts bombing Iraq tomorrow, would you be surprised? No. If he wages another war against Iran, would you be surprised? No, no one would be surprised. And would anyone in the West condemn him? Would he be sanctioned? Of course not. He can do what he wants. And that is something that is turning the region away from him, even among those regimes and entities that are affiliated to the Western camp. I don't see victory at all as an Israeli victory. I see an Israeli regime that is despised globally, despised across the region, that has delegitimized itself. And by the way, and this is something that I've said to a couple of people, I don't know if you would agree or not. This whole Epstein episode that has made such a, has such an impact on American society. If it wasn't for the last 21 months of genocide by the Israelis, the Mossad Israeli link to this affair would have still been would have angered many Americans. But I don't think it would have had the impact that it has after 21 months of genocide, because many Americans now despise the Israeli regime. And then when they see that Epstein was Mossad, and that Mossad, which is a part of a regime that's carrying out genocide and is bombing country after country and slaughtering people every day, this Mossad is basically doing this to American girls, and then through that they're able to have donors and politicians and government officials abide by their demands. That makes Americans even more angry. In other words, if what we're seeing today in the United States had happened before October the 7th, 2023, I think it would have been bad for the Israeli regime, but not nearly as bad as it is now. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the Israeli regime has self-destructed. Netanyahu has destroyed the image and the credibility and the so-called legitimacy of the Israeli regime in the eyes of the world. That is not something that you can calculate in dollars or euros or yuan or any other currency. It's just something that you cannot calculate.
Yeah, very good points. And on that Epstein question, well, it falls out of the purview of the channel. My assessment of it all is that very much to what you just said, Professor Marandi, with the image of Israel, the public opinion, especially in the United States of Israel, being so low as it is, this link that Israel has, and of course, these major figures who are either being blackmailed or who are collaborating with a figure like Epstein, the anger about this after 2 years of Israel given carte blanche by the United States to do what it's doing, genocide in Gaza, and of course, expanding regional war, and the U.S. going deeper and deeper into war as well, angers anyone who's outside of the establishment lexicon. It angers everybody outside of that. And, mentor Glenn Ford, he used to say to me, and he used to say this, he said, if there's one thing that unites people outside of the establishment, it's hatred of the banks. Now we are seeing a hatred of Israel, the hatred of what Israel is doing as being the great uniter. And yeah, the Epstein case and how big that has blown back in the Trump administration's face is definitely a big example of that. Professor Marandi, a question to you, though, given this playbook you laid out with the Takfiri, the Wahhabi proxies, the terror groups that have been funded and backed for decades and decades to get to this point of attempting to regime change Iran, and of course conducting regime change all around the region, and destabilizing it for that purpose. Given that that's the playbook, what do you say to those who say, well, then now is the time for Iran to do what it says it can do, which has been to, destroy all of Tel Aviv, send a real strong message to Israel that if it continues down this playbook, that there will be significant consequences. What do you say to people who are right now feeling this way and thinking about this?
First of all, a lot of the people who push this argument and say, why isn't Iran doing more? And I'm not speaking about your audience, but there is a group of people, especially as I said, those people who are professional antagonists towards Iran. As I said, some of them are themselves takfiri, or they're influenced by takfiri. They've been influenced by uh, oil anti-Iranian propaganda for decades, coming from the West, and from our region. I remember just a while back, just a few months ago, TRT of Turkey, they wanted to open up a Persian channel. Then the head of TRT said, I don't remember the words, but he said, we're going to punish Iran, or we're going to hurt them through, basically what he meant was through TRT Persian. Like there's a Holocaust going on in Gaza, but Turkey's focus is on the resistance and on Iran. So this anti-Iranian narrative that has been going on for a very, very long time, and promoted across the region and beyond, that I think we should always keep that in mind when we're looking at the debates going online. The people who are hitting at Iran repeat always, and I see them sometimes in my comments. They themselves are not doing anything about Gaza. They're not funding the resistance. They're not supporting I mean, even now in Syria, it's very interesting. They speak about a ceasefire between the Israeli regime and Syria. The Syrian regime is not shooting at Israel. They're shooting at Syrian citizens, and their takfiris are, they're saying that the Druze are, the enemy, and
Did you
all
see the
that. And
tepid remarks from Jolani too? Oh, Israel is instigating a little. They're instigating. It's not good, But no fight back toward Israel, which is literally invading Syria.
And also he
Literally,
thanked the United States. He
yes, for
thanked the
the
United States.
for the
You
ceasefire,
know,
quote
you
unquote.
know, there's something very interesting, and I never talk about these things, but there's this concept in the Quran called tagiyah, and it's mentioned 3 times in the Quran, and in one occasion it's referring to uh, Ammar ibn Yasir, one of the closest companions to the Prophet. What happened was that when he and his parents, when they converted to Islam and supported the Prophet, they were tortured, and his parents were murdered under torture. And he was being tortured, and under torture, they told him to insult the Prophet. And he was being, badly tortured. And he did, right? And some people criticize him, but the Prophet supported him, and the Quran supported him, basically. And and the Prophet said his heart is pure. So taqiyya means that, like, if someone is holding a gun to your head, and you choose, and I say insult your parents, or say this, and you do that, you're doing it because you're about to be killed. You can do that. You can also say, no, I won't do it, but you can do that under these extreme circumstances. Now, these people, because they hate Iran, and they distort this and say that the Iranian, they believe in taqiyya, something which is in the book and which is in Islamic history. And they say that these Iranians are deceitful. They hide their true intentions. That's why they say the Shia are really evil. And they don't take into account that over the past 40 years, it's been Iran that's been supporting the Palestinian cause and paying such a heavy price. And not just Palestine, but Bosnia. When Bosnia was being destroyed, the only country that supported Bosnia was Iran. The only country that was principled in all this time. But these people are now saying, no, this is the point. These takfiris, they're saying, no, Julani, he's saying one thing, but he means something else. And so it's interesting that the warped or this distorted definition of taqiyya, which they attribute to Iranians and the Shia, now they're deploying it for themselves. And they also say, like, Mr. Erdogan, he's sending oil to Israel. True, he's doing trade. True, he has direct flights. True, he has an embassy. But behind the scenes, he really means something different. And sometimes they said, "Oh, so you mean that they're doing what you call tagiyah," which is not the real definition, but I think you get what I'm saying. So the point is that these people who willfully close their eyes to reality, no matter what Giuliani says or does, they're still going to defend it. No matter what atrocities are being committed, they will defend it. And no matter what Qatar or Erdogan or others do, they will still support them. And no matter what Iran does for the Palestinian people, they will still condemn Iran. But the point is, or they'll say Iran is not sincere. But the point is that war is a very complicated affair. It's deadly. People die. We had over 1,000 deaths. The Israeli regime, they it was a, what do you call it? It was an unprovoked attack. It was an act of, it was war, but it was also, Iran was caught off guard. Iran was expecting attack, but they weren't expecting the Israeli regime to carry out a regime change operation. I hate the term regime change because I don't use it for Iran. I always use it for the West. But it was a regime change operation. I think that the military was not thinking that would happen. So on the first night, we had huge numbers of casualties, and commanders of the armed forces, many of them were murdered. So it took like 4 days for Iran to turn the tide. And then, of course, it got better and better for Iran. But Iran still there was a lot of damage. This is war. And also, Iran has to keep the global South on its side. It wants, it's not as if, many of the people who are watching our show, they would love to see the Israeli regime collapse tomorrow, like apartheid South Africa. They'd love that. So would I. But if there is, the Iranians have to show to the world that's now on Iran's side, forget the Europeans and the Americans, that they're not the ones who are trying to, create tensions in the region. And obviously, the Chinese are worried about oil supplies, right? The Asians, countries across Asia, are worried about the price of oil across Latin America, Africa, Central Asia. So Iran wants at the same time to hammer the regime, but also it wants to keep the global South on board and on the side of the victim and the Palestinian people. So Iran hurt the Israeli regime badly. We all saw what Iran did, especially during the last few days. Almost all Iranian missiles were getting through and striking very sensitive targets. So that's A. The second point, as I said, a lot of the concessions that Iran got are not should not be taken lightly. Right now, if Iran, based upon those concessions that Iran was able to obtain, Iran is able to more easily prepare itself for the second round. And look, Danny, we have to keep something in mind. And I think maybe we've discussed this before. I'm not quite sure, but the Israeli regime has weapons that Zelensky could only dream of. The Americans would never give Zelensky what they give to the Israelis. So Iran is facing the best that the United States and the Europeans have. And it's not just what they give to the Israeli regime, it's what they themselves put on the battlefield.
Yep.
Because the Americans are in Turkey using their radar bases, they're in the Persian Gulf, in Qatar. And by the way, I think everyone knows now that Trump was lying. Iran destroyed key facilities in the CENTCOM base in Qatar. But in any case, I think people have seen the satellite images, but and the footage and pictures. So the NATO was behind the Israeli regime. Regional countries were willingly or unwillingly supporting the Israeli regime. We know what was happening in northern Iraq. We know what was happening in Azerbaijan, the Republic of Azerbaijan. So Iran now, so the Israelis and also the Israelis with Western intelligence agencies support, they had a host of collaborators in Iran that were working against the country. Many of them were among the refugees. We have millions of refugees in Iran from neighboring countries. Iran, based in it has the largest number of refugees in the world compared to its population. And of course, we have some of these Takfiri remnants of ISIS and Al Qaeda that have come in and are among those refugees, or are from certain parts of parts of Iran itself. And so Iran has had to deal with these. Iran has to also learn how to deal with these technologies that have been deployed for the first time on the battlefield. So Iran now has the opportunity to prepare itself for the next round, which is almost inevitable. And I think next time around, Iran will be much more prepared because Iran knows what the other side has. The Israelis did everything they could. They hit as hard as they could because this was to overthrow the government, the state. They wanted to decapitate and then bring about what they called regime change, which shows how stupid they are. And it shows how stupid the Europeans and the Americans are because they thought Iran was a house of cards. Contrary to what I've always been saying, that Iran has a high degree of legitimacy in the eyes of the public. And after this unprovoked war, it's gone through the roof. But that aside, Iran also needs to prepare itself for round two. It did win round one, but if it wants to be able to hit harder next time, if it wants to suffer less losses and do more damage, then it has work to do.
Before we move on, final comment on this, Professor Marty. What do you make of the reports then of Iran seeking out Chinese technology? In particular, both there were several reports, J-10C fighter jets, which shot down French Rafale jets in the Pakistan-India conflict, and then also air defenses from China. What's your take? Whatever you've heard, whatever you've seen about this development?
Well, I'm not in the military and I'm not privy to that sort of thing, but without a doubt, Chinese technology is advancing rapidly, and I think in most areas, they're ahead of the United States now. And so obviously, Iran has good which has good relations with China. If I was in the Iranian military, I would be seeking further cooperation with China, and China would be seeking closer cooperation with Iran because China is also looking at how the United States has gone rogue. The United States negotiates with Iran, but it's not negotiating in good faith. It's using it to deceive Iran. The Chinese are not fools. They know that the United States, the Europeans, are destroying the rules-based order, the old order which the Americans themselves created after World War II. They're demolishing it, and that makes all countries worried, including China. So China has a vested interest in cooperating further with Iran, and so do the Russians, and so do many others. But I do think we also have to keep in mind that the Iranians have done a fantastic job under 40 years of sanctions in being able to defeat the Israeli regime, which was supported by the collective West and countries in our region. Remember, Jordanian airspace was under their control. Iraqi airspace under their control. Radar bases in Turkey and across the Persian Gulf were being used to help the Israeli regime offensively and defensively. And then the Republic of Azerbaijan. People on the border have said that people on the border have said they saw drones coming in from the Republic of Azerbaijan. And that has angered people a lot, especially people who live in cities close to the Republic of Azerbaijan, the city of Tabriz. That area, actually Marand, Marandi means a person from Marand. Marand is very close to Tabriz. That has outraged people. So the fact that under those circumstances, Iranian drones and missiles were able to bring Netanyahu to his knees in that way, I think shows how sophisticated Iranian technology is. But without a doubt, the Iranians and the Chinese are going to be working closer to each other. I don't know details. And some things I think are very long term. But, aircraft, or, I mean, if there's discussion about purchasing aircraft, obviously there are lots of details and infrastructure that have to be negotiated. But the point is that China is very concerned about the behavior of the United States. Everyone should be. Across the world, people are concerned. And so that is an added advantage to Iran. And that's why I was saying earlier that for Iran, it's very important for it to be seen as first of all, Iran is the rational actor, but it is important for it to be seen as the rational actor by other countries. That way, countries like China and others tilt closer to Iran. They see the Israelis as run by a madman, the United States run by another madman, but the Iranians being calm, being sane, being careful for the interests of the international community, but at the same time assertive and decisive, and that contributes to better relations with countries like China and other BRICS member states and other states in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and elsewhere.
Yeah, it's definitely. And my final comment, and I just want to talk to you about this other issue, Professor Marandi, is that people who want Iran to accelerate the process of the Israeli regime's demise, I think it's like adventurism. There needs to be an understanding that it's not, for me, it's not even just, because your point is definitely true, making sure that Iran has an image that allows the rest of the world to do business with Iran and to cooperate with Iran to ensure Iran's existential survival. I mean, Iran has to also look at its own survival too.
But also to marginalize the Israeli regime.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Because the Israeli regime in a war with Iran, if the war lasted 22 days instead of 12 days, there would have been more damage to the Israeli regime and more damage to Iran. But that would not end the regime. Right. That's not going to bring about an end. What Iran seeks to do is weaken the regime, show the world that it is not invincible, and that image has been destroyed, because day after day people were seeing Tel Aviv and other cities being hammered, despite the fact that the Americans were there, the Europeans were there, everyone was there trying to protect their Nazi, their Zionist, their Zionist supremacist buddies in Palestine. So that invincibility has been destroyed. The legitimacy of the Israeli regime has been destroyed, because they are seen as crazy, they're seen as murderous, they're seen as aggressive across the board, and the Iranians are seen as the rational actors. This helps to mobilize the world. I know some people say, no, this is all nonsense. The public opinion doesn't matter, but I don't see it that way. It is very important for the people of the region to see the Israeli regime as vulnerable. It is important for even regional regimes that are in the American camp to see that the Israelis are dangerous. Because what the Americans and the Israeli regime and the Europeans have been doing for decades is that they've been trying to scare the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, the Jordanians, and the Erdogan and others about this big threat, Iran and the resistance. But now people are beginning to, even these people, forget the people on the streets, even these people are wondering, what is Netanyahu going to do next? What is Trump going to do next? If Giuliani or Shara, who tries to kiss the ring. He told Netanyahu, he sent multiple messages to Netanyahu saying that our enemies are Iran and Hezbollah. He kissed the ring, but they still bombed him. They told him that he can go into Soeda, and then they bombed him. So when they do that to Shara, who was brought in by NATO, how can the Saudis feel secure? How can Egypt feel safe? How can Jordan feel safe? How can Turkey feel safe? This, I think, is part of what Iran is trying to do.
Yeah.
It is trying to, through multiple means, corner the United States and the Israeli regime, because we have to think long term. We have to think 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And Iran is not going to be the one to sink the entire world economy, which a major war with Iran, as you've said many times, Professor Marandi, will do. And so Iran is playing a very, and it has to be admitted, very smart long game. If you look at the results of the so-called 12-day war, Iran was ready. It wasn't ready for the initial attack. If there's one thing Israel does well, it's absolutely nasty kinds of covert intelligence operations, but you don't get many opportunities at that. That's not something you can repeat over and over, but Iran was definitely ready with its response. Now, we've been talking about how to assess the overall situation that the region finds itself in with really what is unhinged Israeli aggression, of course, spearheaded, backed, facilitated by the United States. I wanted to ask you about Yemen. Yemen has been conducting constant operations. And when I say constant, I mean daily operations since the so-called 12-day war hostilities has ended. I mean, it was coordinating with Iran to a certain degree, firing some missiles during that time. But ever since, it's been daily. It's sunk 2 ships in the Red Sea recently in the last month or so. It also now, Professor Marandi, it has been this has been basically Israel. If we look at this image, this has been Israel almost daily because of what Yemen is doing. The sirens are constantly on. Ben Gurion Airport has been targeted. Of course, what we hear over and over again from Israel, just like we heard during the 12-day war, is that these missiles never get through. All right, that's what they say. They never get through. They're intercepted. But we also know, Professor Marandi, that Yemen has not only been targeting Ben Gurion Airport, but it's closed down the port of Eilut or Eilat or however it's pronounced. I mean, that is shut down. It's bankrupt because of the constant missile fire that Yemen is waging as part of its blockade. So when we look at failures of the Israeli regime and the U.S. too, this is the biggest one because Yemen is, if you look at all of the data of Yemen as a nation, it shouldn't be able to do this, nor should it be able to fire hypersonic missiles toward Israel on the daily, especially if Israel and the U.S. are supposed to be as boisterous and dominant as they say they are. So what's your take on this?
Absolutely. And my, uh, I would really love one day to be able to go to Yemen. I've tried a couple of times, but apparently the flight that goes through Jordan, they won't allow me or people with Iranian passports on to get a visa to get to take that flight because you have to get a Jordanian visa and then get on the flight to Yemen. They're wonderful people, and they are the pride. They and Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They're the pride of and many in the Iraqi resistance. They are the pride of the Arab world. They have stood up for the Palestinian people since day one. When Hezbollah was drawing away the army from Gaza during the onslaught during those first few months, and really helping Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the others to to stand up against this blitzkrieg and this genocide that started. On the other hand, Yemen was shutting down uh, business and trade for the Israeli regime and making life more difficult for them. Of course, sadly, some of the goods were going they instead of going to Israel, they went to Egypt, and then they would change the ship and then send it to Israel. And then, but also Erdogan in Turkey was allowing goods that the Israelis couldn't get from Asia to be exported from Turkey. But still, this has done huge damage to the Israeli regime. And remember, this is the same Ansarullah, this is the same Yemeni people who are being starved by the world. I watched, it was pretty long, but I watched Tucker Carlson's interview the other night, and his guest was saying that he was talking about Epstein, and it was a very interesting conversation. It was very long. I mean, it took me like a day and a half to be able to get through it because I couldn't sit down and listen to it the whole time. I listened to it while driving around mostly. But in it, he was saying that American warships, and this he was witness to this. He was on a warship. They would go in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, and they would find these small boats, and then that were carrying medicine at a time when kids in Yemen were starving and dying of diarrhea, and they would like find medicine, just medicine, and they would dump all of them in the sea. American sailors. So this is the Yemen which was being starved for 7 years by the Americans and the Canadians and the Australians and the Europeans and the British, and the West was starving and strangling them, and the Saudis were bombing them, and the Emiratis were bombing them, and Turkey was and the Qatar were supporting the genocide. Then, of course, after the split between Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, Turkey this and Qatar distanced themselves from the war. But uh, but the point was that everyone was trying to destroy these people. Everyone, and the Arab media was constantly putting out anti Ansarullah propaganda and saying that they're enemies of Islam and enemies of the Arab world and mercenaries of Iran, and all sorts of hatred was being spout by Al Jazeera, by all these thousands of media outlets that are funded by these oil and gas rich regimes, not just Al Arabiya or Sky News Arabic, or you know many other outlets. But now they are the pride of the Arab world. People see, so you see that after all that hardship, all that suffering, all the death and the slaughter of women and children through starvation, they remain steadfast. And today, they defeated the United States in the Red Sea. And after their agreement with the United States, they continue to blockade the Israeli
Yes.
regime. And this shows to the rest of us that we have a huge responsibility as individuals. We're nothing. I, others, we feel helpless. But Yemen, which is the poorest country, maybe the poorest country in the world, or one of the poorest countries in the
Yeah.
world, through sheer determination and brilliant leadership and a brilliant military, they were able to have a huge impact on what is going on right now in West Asia. I think that's something that we should learn from as individuals. We each have to be, uh, we have to play our own role, regardless of how helpless we see ourselves. We all have to play our role. And if we do play our role, and if we do carry out our responsibility and support the resistance and support the Palestinian people and oppose the United States and the Israelis, wherever they may be, sincerely, then I think that the Israeli regime, its demise will be much more swift. But we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to, recognize. We have to be honest with ourselves, and if make sure that we're not being complicit in any way or form. There are many things that can be done, whether it's boycotting, whether it's opposing the United States. You can't support the United States in Syria and oppose it in Gaza. It's not doable.
Right.
It won't work. You cannot support the United States in Lebanon and oppose it in Gaza. That's not just hypocritical. It just shows that that person is not serious. But in any case, I think that Yemen has taught us all a huge lesson, but also it's given us hope
Yep.
because it shows it goes against what was it, the Jerusalem Post? I wasn't looking at the
Oh
it was
yes.
I don't know,
The
it runs against what the
post-Iran
Jerusalem Post
order.
said.
Yeah, the post-Iran
Yeah,
order, which
and
really
by the
what they're
way,
saying is resistance itself. I mean, that's how I read
yeah,
it. It's
yeah,
resistance. It's a post-Iran order.
exactly.
That's foolishness. But yeah, resistance itself
Exactly.
is
This
dead.
is not Iran. They are trying to make this about Iran. In other words, Ansarullah is a proxy, Hezbollah is a proxy, Hamas is a proxy, Islamic Jihad is a proxy, the Iraqi resistance. That's nonsense. They all have agency. They're all doing it out of principle. They all made their sacrifices out of principle. Thousands in Lebanon, thousands, maybe more than thousands, tens of thousands in, I don't know, thousands in Yemen and so on. They've and of course in Gaza, the West Bank, they have made huge sacrifices out of principle, out of and they have bought time for Gaza, and they have given hope to the rest of us through their resistance. So, what can I say? Who am I to speak about the people of Yemen? They're way
Yeah.
above the likes of me.
Yeah, well, the one interesting thing to, if we recall, Professor Marandi, is that um, during the time there was the bombing campaign of Yemen early in the Trump administration, when it ended, one of the things that angered Israel and really backers of Israel was that part of the stipulation, that agreement, that mysterious so-called ceasefire agreement that was worked out with Ansar Allah, which doesn't have any pens of paper to it, but one of the agreements did not include stopping strikes on Israel. So Yemen got essentially, indirectly or directly, depending on who you believe, um, permission to continue, and that's what has happened. And you see this in the Western mainstream media even today. You see responses like this: Trump claimed victory against Houthis in fight over Red Sea shipping. Now they're sinking tankers again. But there's always a tone whenever talk about Ansar Allah in Israeli media and Western media that um, what happened against Ansar Allah, the war, was not sufficient. And not only was that sufficient, but Israel finds itself now in a protracted war of attrition with Ansar Allah as it tries to produce and pursue this greater Israel project.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think we have to keep in mind that the political establishment in the United States and the West, they are all supportive of ethno supremacism, ethnic cleansing, genocide. It doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrats or whether they're Labor or conservative in the UK and so on and so forth. They're all the same. So if you recall during the 12-day war with Iran, this war of aggression, we saw on CNN, at least I saw it. I saw the clips of it. I don't watch CNN, but I saw clips where they were talking about um, sleeper cells, Iranian sleeper cells in the United States. So what was CNN trying to do? CNN was trying to antagonize Iran in the eyes of ordinary Americans. They're trying to create fear and hatred, and they're trying to create fear and hatred towards Iranian Americans, many of whom had never even seen Iran, like they were American born. Many of them didn't don't even speak Persian, but their parents or their grandparents or whoever they came from Iran, or maybe one parent. But the point was that they were willing to sacrifice their safety, the safety of all these uh, Iranian Americans in the United States, in order to demonize Iran, in order to justify Trump's war against Iran. That's what it was about. And so, regardless of whether the Trump was able to damage Iran's nuclear sites or not, uh, whether he was able to do any real damage or not, they will those they push Trump's opponents will push for the narrative that the damage was not the damage that he said was not brought about in order to push for war. And that's what they're doing with Ansarullah. Why? Because the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the liberals, the conservatives, they are all Israeli firsters. They're all Israeli firsters. It's just like with Epstein. Why is it that, like, the the Democrats during the Biden years, they didn't do anything about Epstein because their own people are just as deeply involved. Their own donors are just as deeply involved.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was thinking the whole time about Epstein. When people say, when Trump says, "Why does the Democrats do it, making it partisan?" It's like, come on, you know that this is not, you know that this isn't a partisan affair. This is a bipartisan affair. But
Yeah,
continue.
exactly. I mean, he was arrested when Trump was president. They killed him when Trump was, or they suicided him when Trump was president. During the Biden years, they didn't do anything about it. It's because the elites in the United States, it's one party. I mean, they may have differences over abortion or some other issues, but the real issues, global hegemony,
Right.
have never-ending wars, empire, uh, and that sort of thing, the Israeli regime, that is something where there's a consensus. And in comparison to these other issues, though, these are the main issues. The millions of people who are being slaughtered and countries being destroyed and the mass movement of populations and from across the region, these are the key issues. And these are what have impoverished the United States also more than anything else, these endless wars, the middle class and so on. So there's no difference between the two. So they will try to humiliate Trump on Yemen. They'll try to humiliate Trump on Iran in order for war in order to prepare the grounds for war. I mean, no one CNN is not asking itself about these sleeper cells. They were talking about these Iranian sleeper cells a couple of weeks ago. Well, what happened? Did they carry out their operations? Have they been arrested? No, because that wasn't the point. There were no sleeper cells. They just want war, just like Saddam Hussein's the lies that they promoted in order to justify the war against Iraq, or in order to invade Libya and destroy Libya, or the dirty war in Syria. I mean, the OPC. Remember, just Al Jazeera. Oof, Al Jazeera did a tweet yesterday. I responded to it. They said that what Israel is doing to Syria is making it more difficult to figure out what Assad did with his chemical weapons.
Oh, man,
I mean,
obsessed.
that's disgraceful. They know there are no chemical weapons. They and their ISIS and Al Qaeda allies, their Takfiri allies, have been in charge for 7 months now. Of course, there are no chemical weapons. I mean, they'll try to find something. They'll make up something. But there were no chemical weapons. And the OPCW, I mean, Aaron Matei, he's done a lot of work on this, and so has a number of our other friends. Um, um, Very good. Lots of good people have done a lot of good work. But from the very beginning in Duma, when the OPCW sent its experts, they went in there and said, no, this is not, the signs don't show, there's no sign that the Syrian government did this. And then when they went back, these people were sidelined, and others were, a political report was written. And when these whistleblowers came out, no one said anything. Why? Because there was a consensus. No, the narrative was that Assad gassed his own people. So Al Jazeera, along with the Western media, they're all the same. I remember when I was in Beirut when the Israelis murdered Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, when he was martyred. And he was also predicting what would happen in Syria. I mean, what we're seeing today in Syria is exactly what he said would happen. And he tried his best to save the Syrian people. And those people who willfully close their eyes, they're answerable for all these deaths that we see today. and for the success that Netanyahu has had. They have no, and they will continue to lie and pretend that it was Iran's fault or what. History will show what they did to the Syrian people. And if they want to be redeemed, they have to do something about it. They have to make up for this mess that they've created. But in any case,
Hmm.
but in any case,
Right.
so I was in Beirut when he was martyred, and I went there the day before, and the day after, I think it was, he was martyred. Al Jazeera asked me to be. I think it was well, anyway, around that time, but it was after he was martyred. Al Jazeera asked me to be on their news program. Then right before me, they brought in a reporter to Beirut, and it was the top of the hour, and she started bad mouthing Iran. Iran is horrible. Iran violates. I mean, they're bombing Beirut. They're bringing down apartment blocks. They're calling these Hezbollah stronghold, in order to justify the slaughter of ordinary Lebanese. And then this reporter is bad mouthing Iran. And then when they came to me. I said, "Why is your reporter talking about Iran? What is this? What is what's going on right now? The slaughter in Beirut of ordinary citizens by the Israeli regime. What does that have to do with human rights in Iran?" So yeah, so Al Jazeera yesterday, I think it was, they tweeted that so it just shows where these people stand. I mean, they're good people in Al Jazeera. They're good people in but I'm talking about these institutions. It's I mean, they're good people in the BBC. I know some good people. I remember a couple of times actually when I had a important debate or something on the BBC, and then someone would call me from inside the BBC more than once, and they said, "Look, they're setting you up, and just be careful."
Right.
That sort of thing. So they're good people, but the point is that this is how the Western media works. This is how regional media works, and that is why we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience with Sky News during COVID, 2020-ish, at times when China was more in the conversation. I was brought on a couple of times by someone who was definitely more sympathetic, and he would say, be careful about what's going to happen, traps, and then they stopped inviting me, and that's kind of what happens when you say the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. During the 12-day war, I was only invited by Sky twice. Once I didn't have a decent internet connection,
Right.
and the BBC maybe once, and then they withdrew it because right after Sky. I think it was very controversial. My exchange with the reporter on Sky, and it went viral. And then as soon as that finished, the BBC just withdrew it and said we have a change in schedule and we're not covering Iran like it's a war. It's top of the news, but so it's interesting that in the past I'd constantly be invited, but during the 12-day war, I was almost exclusively speaking on alternative media, which is fine with me. I'm I don't care for mainstream media, legacy media.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah. And so Professor Marandi, back on the question of Yemen, then I just wanted to pull up a point that you've been making that is being made for us by the Western mainstream media. There is worry. It's not just Yemen sinking ships or closing the ports. It's also attempting to use this continued resistance to the Israeli regime, and of course the United States backing it, to build up toward war with Iran. So Wall Street Journal reports that Yemen, so this is not Ansar Allah,
But,
yes.
Daddy, look at the title. Actually, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Iran is, I think it's a mistake. They should rewrite it. Iran is moving to rearm its militia
Allies.
allies. Yeah, not proxies.
Yep. Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
That's almost legitimized them by accent.
Yeah.
Oops. But what they're saying here is that over the last several weeks, in the month of July, we have seen the U.S.-backed Yemen regime, which has ostensibly very little power comparatively to Ansar Allah's influence with the people, but it supposedly intercepted Iranian weapons moving to supply Ansar Allah, and then Syria, which has been a concern for those who saw the overthrow of Assad as a very negative thing for the resistance as a whole. the terror Al-Qaeda government in Syria has supposedly intercepted weapons from Iran that were heading toward Hezbollah. What do you make of this overall narrative? We're never able to verify these things because this is all just hearsay from the Western intelligence, from the Western mainstream media. But at the same time, this is something we continuously hear. And yet what we hear from the Yemeni side, Ansarallah side, from the Iranian side, from the resistance side is that they're producing their own weapons. They are making use of what they have to indigenous capabilities. So what's your assessment of this?
Well, there's no doubt that they have indigenous capabilities. They're smart people in Yemen, Lebanon, and of course, Iran will help them have enhance those indigenous capabilities, and I'm sure that Iran will help them uh, with in any by any means necessary if there's something that they cannot produce themselves. And the same is true in Gaza. The reason why Gaza still is able to remain defiant is because of the courage of the resistance fighters, but also they're receiving support. It's obvious that somehow weapons are getting in, 2 years. So it's almost 2 years now. So something they're, obviously they're getting support from somewhere. And by the way, the general who was in charge of aiding the resistance in Gaza was one of the people who was martyred by the Israeli regime on the first day. But of course, he's been replaced, and they will continue to support. But it is interesting, by the way, because that so-called post-Iran, which is really post-resistance, not Iran, this is much bigger than Iran. The axis of resistance, Yemen is an equal partner. It's Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic all, and the Iraqi resistance. They are all in this together. So this post-resistance era apparently is not something that the Wall Street Journal fully agrees with. And they can say that they've intercepted whatever. Who knows? As you say, we cannot verify what they say. But in general, I don't trust anything that comes from the Western media. If during the 12-day war, what they were saying about the war was that Iran is losing throughout. And then, so why was it? And then we saw Bannon at the end of the war, Steve Bannon, who was very well informed, basically say that the real story is that Trump saved Israel.
Yep.
So, but what we were hearing throughout the 12 days was that Iran is in trouble, and Iran is, the Israeli, and when the Israelis were like slaughtering innocent people, they were saying these are precision strikes. To kill a general, let's say, they would kill everyone in the building. To kill a scientist, to murder a scientist, they'd murder everyone in the building. That's not precision. That's not even like that's no intelligence coup either. Like a major general, if he lives somewhere, his neighbors know who he's not. There's no secret homes or secret neighborhoods in Iran. They live in Tehran. And then to strike a building and kill 30 children, 20 children, 15 children to get one person, Western media likes to call it a precision strike and an intelligence coup. How's that an intelligence coup? How is that precision? So anything that comes from the Western media, especially outlets like Reuters or the New York Times, these are like the worst of the worst. I don't take seriously ever. And sometimes, when something comes up and people send me messages and they're worried, I usually tell them, look, if it's Reuters, just forget it. I mean, just 3 years ago, they were saying like Ayatollah Khamenei is, New York Times was saying we have 5 sources or something that Ayatollah Khamenei is on his deathbed. Okay. Then the next day, literally, he had a public. He was seen in he had a public meeting, and he had a speech like 2 days later. But there's no accountability in the West because these media outlets they're not journalists. That information is given to them by Western governments and intelligence agencies. They say, run with this. We need you to say this. We're carrying out, this is all psychological warfare. So I wouldn't take anything that they say seriously. I'm not saying ignore it completely, but I'm saying, they're not credible. I trust the North Korean news agency more than I trust any Western news agency.
I always say, if the Western mainstream media, if Israeli media, sometimes Israeli media can almost be hilariously truthful in some senses, just because of the hubris. Is just so it is just so far grown at this point. It's sticking out of the pot.
The Hebrew media is pretty outrageous.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes.
They won't say, they won't say what they really think. Their racism, their
No,
supremacism, and their ugliness.
nope.
It's not really shown that much in English.
No.
But in
No.
Hebrew
Yeah,
and
I can imagine.
Telegram channels and all that, they are horrific. They are
I
real
can
monsters.
imagine. Yeah. Oh yes. This is true. I just want to pull this article up one more time so people know what you were referencing about the Middle East post-Iran era has begun. This is what some thinkers inside of the Jerusalem Post are saying, but in the same vein as you said, Professor Randi, um, you have Ansarallah continuing this operation. You have the resistance continuing. I mean, that Israel is not, they are wrecking Gaza. There's no doubt about that. They're committing a genocide, but the resistance is continuing. And you have Al Qassam coming out with announcements saying that they are staying steadfast in ensuring that any kind of settlement that happens, cessation of hostilities, whatever it is that happens there, is not only full and of course can be held accountable, which I don't think that's a possibility. To be honest, at this point, there is no holding Israel to account, but they're being very steadfast in saying, no, they're going to continue to deal and fight with Israel as much as they can for however long as it takes. That's not really the narrative that we're hearing in the Western mainstream media. Every other day, there's articles like that one, Professor Marandi from the Jerusalem Post. Iran is defeated. Hezbollah is defeated. Hamas is defeated.
And
Yemen is defeated. That's what you
Danny,
hear.
sadly, those who antagonize Iran, and some of them, they pretend that they're supporters of Palestine. They're, as I said, they're these sort of influenced by Takfiri ideology, and even though they may not think they themselves as Salafi or Wahhabi or Takfiri or followers of Ibn Taymiyyah or Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, but they're influenced by that, and they like to believe everything that's negative about Iran or the resistance. So they like to say that Hezbollah was defeated because they hate Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah sacrificed itself so much for the Palestinian people. What have they done? I mean, if what have they done for Palestine? What have any of these countries done for Palestine? Which of these countries are sanctioned? Which of these countries have been punished by the United States? Not a single one of them. Which of them have, you know, paid a price? And and they always make these excuses. One day they say, well, no, behind the scenes, Iran is doing a deal. Okay, now Iran's been bombed. Now what's the narrative? But so it's always something negative. So they'll say it's the resistance has been defeated. I remember after the ceasefire, these people were speaking with such contempt for Hezbollah and gloating how Hezbollah in their eyes was defeated. Gloating that Hezbollah was defeated. These people have problems. They have to rethink, and I think their whole worldview has a problem. They have to look deep inside and think about what's wrong inside for them to think this way and to behave this way and to show such hatred and such irrational hatred. Why do they fear Iran so much? Why do they fear the resistance so much?
Hmm.
The resistance, all it has done is it has kept the name of Palestine alive. No one else has done it. And by the way, when I spoke about Bosnia, it was also Hezbollah that went to Bosnia to help them. And Hezbollah went to Yemen to help. From what we're hearing, I'm not privy to this sort of thing, but Hezbollah has shown images of their martyrs who were previously in Yemen. So they helped build up the resistance in Yemen. But these people, out of this irrational hatred and this takfiri ideology, and it's promoted by people who I can name. I know some of these people. I've met them. I've been with them. I don't want to speak about anyone who's not online right now who can defend himself or herself. But the point is that they are part of this narrative. They contribute to the Western narrative. They contribute to the anti-resistance narrative. They're constantly attacking Iran and Hezbollah. Yet Abu Obaideh, he keeps thanking Iran and Yemen and Hezbollah, but they pretend that they don't hear that. He hasn't thanked anyone else but these entities, but they pretend that they don't hear that. Why? Because they're caught up in this very strange worldview that they have.
Professor Marandi, do you have a time for a few audience questions? There are actually a few good ones, so I wanted to get your.
Sure.
I think they're good ones.
You frighten me. Good questions are dangerous.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think this is a good one. I've invited John Mearshart on my show. Have not gotten response from him over the months and years, but this is a good question. Are you in favor of Iranian nuclear deterrence, as John Mearsheimer recommends, as Iran's best option to build the bomb?
I'm in this somewhat difficult position because I am not in government
Yeah.
and I have nothing to do with government. And some of our mutual friends who've come to Iran know that I have nothing to do with government and I have nothing to do with, anything. I do my interviews at home and I teach in university but there is this belief that I can't do anything about where people think that somehow I'm like a decision maker or I'm very close to the government, and I have nothing against that. It's just that I'm not in government. And I don't. It's not as if I want to stay away from the government, or I'm sort of, I have no problem with it, with people who work with the government. But the point is that since people think I'm close to the government, things that I have to be careful about the things that I say because then people will interpret it
Right.
as government policy. But since it's a good question and you promoted this question, and so what I would say is that at the moment, I do not believe that Iran should pursue a nuclear weapon, and I think that ultimately the defeat of Israel and the Zionist project will come through a very multi-dimensional resistance that is being carried out by the axis of resistance and with the support of the broader resistance that includes you and me and your audience and people across the world. I think that's what's going to bring an end to the Israeli regime. But I think that while Iran's peaceful nuclear program is about having technology, it's about energy, it's about medicine, it's about science, it's about industry, it's about agriculture. But it is, of course, telling the Israeli regime that, look, don't threaten us, or the Americans, don't threaten us. We are not incapable. We are not, we're not technologically backward. And I think people know that. Iran despite the sanctions, it's a very high tech country. The fact that Iran defeated the Israeli regime and the coalition, because this was not a war between the Israeli regime and Iran. This was a war between the entire West and its regional allies and against Iran. And that would include, unfortunately, neighboring countries. That would include neighboring countries that helped the Israeli regime and did not help Iran, directly or indirectly. So that is because of the will, the steadfastness of the Iranian people, the the leader of Ayatollah Khamenei, an extraordinary person, but also it has very much to do with in, Iran's high tech capabilities that are indigenous. So when Iran has these high tech capabilities, then obviously Iran is capable of making progress in the nuclear industry as well. So I think that the current policy is a good policy. I don't think, because look, I think we discussed this once before. You make a nuclear weapon, everyone else wants a nuclear, and that's destabilizing. It's not just about this criminal regime. Then you'll want Central Asian countries will want nuclear. Then the Caucasus countries in the Caucasus will want nuclear. Then countries across, and then you have one madman who decides to launch a nuclear weapon at someone else, not Iran. Like, Bahrain fires a nuclear weapon at Qatar or whatever. So, as the best thing to do is if it's not 100% necessary, stay away from this terrible weapon. And I say this as a person who's a victim of weapons of mass destruction. I've said this before, more than once on the show. When Saddam Hussein was given chemical weapons by the same Nazi regime that's in Berlin, or back then it was Bonn, when they were giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to gas us. Talk about gas chambers. Well, we saw the gas. We saw it. We lived through it. While I survived and many didn't, and many are still dying a slow death because of these chemical weapons, mustard gas, nerve agents, and so on. Iran, at the highest level, decided not to produce them because they said they're inhumane. And the West blocked Iran from purchasing not just gas masks, but also the chemicals needed to fight against chemical weapons. When they use chemical weapons, and they use these chemicals to I don't know what it's called in English, sorry, but to clean things up and to prevent the chemical weapons from having maximum effect. They were blocking Iran even from purchasing those chemicals to protect ordinary Iranians and Iraqis. I remember, Danny, Halabja. I went there shortly after Saddam Hussein gassed Halabja. But like 5,500 people to 6,500 people were killed within minutes. They used a nerve agent. I went there shortly afterwards. I didn't see the dead bodies or anything. But a lot of foreign reporters were taken there. I wasn't with those reporters, but a lot of Western reporters were taken. Nothing happened. Why? Because the West was determined to help him continue using it. It didn't matter to them that he just slaughtered 6,500 people. It doesn't matter to them that ISIS is in power. They bring ISIS and Al Qaeda to power, and then they remove the sanctions. The sanctions were illegitimate from the beginning, but they keep the sanctions on Cuba. They remove Ashara, who was carrying out car bombings in Iraq, slaughtering thousands of people. They remove, and then they put the UN, what's her name? I forget her name. On the human rights representative for Palestine. They sanction her.
Oh, Francesca Albanese. Yes.
Yes. So they remove sanctions from him, this mass murderer, this killer, and then they put sanctions on her. So, this is the world that we're living in. But in any case, I say this as someone who's experienced chemical weapons and weapons of mass destruction, that the best thing to do is just steer clear of these weapons unless it is, but you have to have the ability under extreme circumstances to be able to deter the ultimate crime.
Yeah. I mean, many people bring up, for example, the DPRK as a successful example of what that deterrence is. I do see the argument for why Iran would pursue a nuclear weapon for this purpose, deterrence. However, there's two things that I always consider, Professor Marandi.
By the way, sorry, Danny, just before you say the two reasons. According to polls, I'm in the minority among Iranians. I'm not in the majority.
Well, I'm not going to say I'm shocked there, given the what we have talked about on this show, and I 100% believe you, and because it's also borne out in history. The more that you try to bully fiercely independent people and country, the more united they become to do whatever it takes to protect and preserve their independence and sovereignty. That's borne out through history. There was an entire Cold War fought over it, and there were many examples of the U.S. The imperial side losing those fights. So, in any case, though, I think about both the fact that Iran's military brass have said many times that they don't feel like they need a nuclear weapon. So that's something that I find very interesting, whether we believe them or not. I'll say from the results of just the 12-day period of hostilities with Israel, that could be true. I'm just going to throw it out there. That could be very true that Iran has enough missiles and capabilities to make it very difficult for Israel to
Danny,
pursue
I would
their
go. I
final.
think, yeah, Israel aside, the Iranian missile and drone capabilities that are directed towards the Persian Gulf region and the Indian Ocean region are far greater than the missile and drone capabilities that are directed towards the Israeli regime.
Right.
Because Iran's defense doctrine was developed to protect it from the United States.
Yep.
And so you have many underground drone and missile bases
Right.
that are not
No missile cities in
fully.
the 12 days, right? No, none of them were
Yes.
engaged. None of them. Yeah.
And many of these are short range missiles and medium range missiles and short range and medium range drones that are much more easy to move around and to fire. They can take out the whole Persian Gulf region very quickly, very swiftly. And that would be more than tens of nuclear weapons. It would bring down the global economy.
Right.
But that's not, this is all of this is like worst case scenario. Iran does not want to harm the global economy. Iran wants the global south to thrive. Iran wants the global south to grow. Iran wants the West, the ordinary people to thrive. Iran wants these regimes to be brought down. It wants the apartheid regime to come down, to be brought down. But the point is that Iran has capabilities, whether it's peaceful nuclear program, whether it's Iran has capabilities that that are out there, and that is what deters the United States. That is what deters madmen like Trump. I mean, it may not seem that way, but look, why is it that the United States backed off?
Yeah. Yep.
Why is it that the Israeli regime backed off? If they could, they would.
Yeah. Yeah. And Trump, you can tell, especially since he's so early in his administration, he does not want to talk about another uh, event like what happened during the 12-day war, quote unquote, the war of aggression launched in Iran. He's really trying to avoid that because it will be a disaster for him. And we saw that you remember in the final period of the 12-day quote unquote war, there was the Iranian symbolic gesture, right? Symbolic gesture where it sent a missile, it sent missiles to the Qatar U.S. Central Command Base, Al Udeid, however you pronounce that, and it was said that that's nothing. It was absolutely nothing happened there. It was they just fired some rockets, nothing got hit. And then what do we find out later on? Well, actually, they took out a communications center, which there's no doubt the United States didn't want that to happen. They just don't have they don't put air defense. They don't have the air defenses to protect themselves from this. And that was the concession they gave to Iran. They said, okay, you can fire the
And by
missiles.
the way,
And that was a big concession because they did hit something, and that's not nothing. That was the lightest.
six of the Iranian missiles, they struck their target. These were old generation missiles, and these were not missiles that were, as I said, alongside the Persian Gulf. But that's a different story.
Right.
And the damage that they did to U.S. high-tech installations in Qatar were far greater than the damage that the United States did to Iran in their strikes.
Yes. Which gets us to the next question, Professor Marandi, is does Iran have a deterrent for the B-2 bomber, which is directly related to what you just said regarding the strikes on, on Iran carried out by the United States in those final days of the 12-day war?
I would imagine that, and again, I'm not in the military, but I would imagine that the Iranians are working on air defenses and at different levels. There are different types of air defenses. I have no doubt that that is a priority in Iran. I have no doubt that they're also working on other things as well. But that would, without a doubt, be a priority.
Right. And then finally, we have another good question, because this gets to the heart of what we've been talking about over the many, many, many months we've been doing shows together. Do you think that détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia was a feint, or was, how should we say, not successful? Because on the one hand, it was a big moment for China, for Iran. I guess you could include Saudi Arabia in there too, in terms of its minor pivot to the east and maybe away from just purely U.S. diktats. But at the same time, we saw what Saudi Arabia did during the quote unquote 12-day war. Wasn't necessarily the behavior of a country in détente with Iran. So your take on this question for us, Marani?
Well, Danny, look, the question is a very good question, but the point is that you know we all know where Mr. Erdogan stands. He's doing trade and business with Netanyahu. He's transporting cheap oil. He is, he's assisting Israel, and they cooperated together in Syria. And he's been supporting ISIS and Al Qaeda for 14 years now. Takfiris who, if they could get their hands on me or you, they'd behead us.
Yeah,
It's clear as
it's
day.
true. It is true.
If they could get their hands on me, the people who Mr. Erdogan and the Qatar fund, they would behead me and my family and my children and everyone around. There's no doubt about that. But do we break off ties? Saudi Arabia, it hosts U.S. It has U.S. assets. Do we break off ties? Do we break off ties with Qatar? Do we break off ties with the Emirates? No, that's what you do in the complicated world that we live in. Is you try to work, because I can speak freely. I'm not a government official. I say what I want. I'm at home, and during the day I'm either at home or I'm on campus. That's except for the 12-day war when I was in a building where they had internet, so I could do my interviews. But besides that, I'm either on campus or in normal time, so I can speak freely. But if I was a politician, if I was in government, if I was in the foreign ministry, obviously I wouldn't be speaking this way. You have to. This is a multi-layered war with the Israeli regime and with the empire, and you have to do what is possible to draw countries away from the Israeli regime. So if you can shift Saudi Arabia a bit, if you can shift Turkey a bit, if you can shift Jordan a bit, that is important. And of course the world is changing. So you're working at the military level, you're working obviously at public diplomacy, which Iran is horrible at. We don't have we don't have media. We don't. People ask me, what's it? A lot of people have become very interested in Iran.
Right.
A lot of people have become very supportive of Iran from across the world. And they ask me, "Do you have a good book that we can read?"
Yeah.
Look, they don't.
I've asked
There's
you
not
that
a
here on
single.
this channel. Yes.
Yeah, we don't have. There's not a single decent book that's written in English on Iran that I mean, there are a couple of books that I think are pretty good. Like I mentioned, the Leverets, their book Going to Tehran, which is an old book, but and there may be others out there. It's not my field. I mean, I'm not even in. My field is literature and Orientalism. But in any case, the point I'm trying to make is that Iran is horrible at public diplomacy and media and that sort of thing. But politics is important. The military is important. All of these work side by side. So if Iran can help regional countries recognize, regardless of what you and I may think of them, that look, it's in your interest to be more careful about this mad dog in Tel Aviv. He's dangerous to you. Jolani, which is literally on his knees, saying our enemies are the same as yours, and saying how fantastic thank you, United States, for bringing about the ceasefire and all that. He gets bombed. If you can sort of help them, or push them to take this into greater consideration, and also give them more options where out of their own self-interest, they tilt away from the United States even slightly. That is significant. So I don't think, the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia was not a big thing for Iran and a small thing for Saudi Arabia. It's actually, I think, more important for the Saudis. They were very keen on this rapprochement.
Right.
Probably more keen than Iran. But the point is that we don't want to push any of these countries into the opposition camp. Again, I speak as a citizen. What I say about these people has nothing to do with the foreign ministry. If I was in the foreign ministry, I wouldn't be speaking this way. But if I was in the foreign ministry and they asked me what should we do, I'd say, look, you engage with these countries as much as possible.
Right.
Taking into account what you and I think about these countries, whatever we think about them, but you engage with them, you draw them, China or Russia. Russia is not a member of the Axis of Resistance. Russia has 2 million people. There are 2 million people in Palestine that are Russian speakers. But the more you can help Russia move away from the West, tilt away from the West, tilt towards the Palestinian cause, the resistance cause, even slightly, that's a big thing. China, BRICS, regional countries, Central Asian countries. So the Iranians have to be sophisticated in foreign policy, just as they have to be sophisticated in their high-tech capabilities, whether it's for civilian purposes or for defense purposes. So yeah, I think that Iran should engage in Saudi Arabia. That doesn't mean that we're happy with the fact that they host all these U.S. Aircraft and military capabilities that are clearly a threat to Iran. But what's the purpose of breaking off ties?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to play two videos for you, Professor Marandi, for your final reaction as we come to a close here, because I think it's important to understand the bigger world developments that are happening that inform why the Palestinian people are being sacrificed and are sacrificing themselves so much in this genocide, why there is a war of aggression on Iran, why Syria, why the region. There's such a pursuit of destroying and destabilizing the region by the United States and by Israel. The first is here is Trump's recent comments on BRICS. Let me see. I hope that you all can hear it. Here is what he had to say recently.
You have this little group called BRICS. It's fading out fast. But BRICS is, they wanted to try and take over the dollar, the dominance of the dollar and the standard of the dollar. And I said, anybody that's in the BRICS consortium of nations, we're going to tariff you 10%. And they had a meeting the following day and almost nobody showed up. They said, leave me alone. They didn't want to be tariffed there. So it's amazing. No, we're not going to let the dollar slide. If we have a smart president, you're never going to let the dollar.
So the audio is, of course, low, but he was talking about BRICS and how all of the hubris, as Trump has been demonstrating, regarding it. And, of course, Iran is a member of BRICS. But then there's a report that Patrick Henningsen recently gave that I want to play in part. And I'll play it on higher speed so we get your comments quickly, Professor Marandi, about why regime change on Iran is so important for the U.S. and Israel in a much bigger sense.
The real energy, resources, effort by the U.S., by the British, by NATO, and by Israel, because they're also playing a role for the U.S. in this, is disrupting and sabotaging the Belt and Road Initiative. And Iran is a big, big part of that. Like everything with Israel, it's a quid pro quo. The U.S. allow Israel to pursue the Greater Israel Project in exchange for helping the Western Empire with its objectives and goals. And one of them is taking out Iran. And once you've taken out Iran, which is a key node, whole Russian trade future is right through Iran down to the Indian Ocean. The middle corridor, it's Azerbaijan and Iran. That's the most important. To bypass the Suez, that's the geopolitical pivot, if you will. That's the future of bringing Europe together with Asia. So the priority of the U.S., they can't build anything. China is doing all the building, so all they can do is wreck, sabotage, disrupt, destroy. If a regime change is successful in Iran, then they move on to Pakistan. And Israel's already said, oh, the Islamists can't have a nuclear weapon in Pakistan. So it's a natural progression. Pakistan is a major ally of China. And
so just in sum, Patrick's making the argument that there is a global phenomenon, global developments happening, which make regime change of Iran such an important priority. And of course, it's in all of the U.S. foreign policy makers' papers. It's in all of Israel. People forget that Israel has foreign policy expansionist literal documents from the clean break of 1996 to people always like to send me messages about the Oded Yunan plan. All of this includes destabilizing the entire region, regime changing any country that's in the way, or whether they are, oppositional toward Israel and see Israel as a colony that needs to be liberated from or not. It doesn't matter. It's all about control and dominance. And what's your take on this larger picture that Iran fits in?
I agree with what he says. He's a person people should follow. I met him in Moscow. He's a really nice guy, and he has a sharp mind. And yes, of course, Iran is key. It is, of course, the Americans, if they wanted, and this is really also shows, the how dishonest some people who are opposed to Iran are. They say that Iran, they've been saying that before the 12-day war. Now I think it's very difficult for them to say that, but they've been saying Iran, they're not really fighting. These are all, Iran is doing deals with Americans. Well, if you look at the map, and as rightly pointed out, the Russians need Iran. It's not just Azerbaijan. It can be done through Georgia and Armenia, although it would be more expensive because it's mountainous, and also through the Caspian Sea, and also through Central Asia and Turkmenistan. But the Russians need Iran. The Chinese need Iran for the Belt and Road. And Iran, of course, has oil and gas. It has the second largest gas reserves, and perhaps the third or fourth largest oil reserves. And Iran, in minerals, it's one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So Iran, in any way that you look at it, it is extremely important. But the issue that Iran has, Iran is not doing a deal with the United States that would sacrifice the Palestinian people. So those who think that Iran, has altered, we've gone through sanctions and war, and despite the fact that the United States needs us, we're not going to give up the Palestinian people. Who else is willing to do that? Who else is willing to do that? No one. So, but you're right. The Americans. The Americans want to undermine Russia and China, and that, by the way, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the 12-day war. Why not continue the war? Iran also wants to strengthen BRICS.
Yeah.
Iran also wants to draw Russia and China closer to the resistance. China and Russia are not going to become a part of the resistance.
Right. Yeah.
But the more interest that they have with the global South,
Yeah.
with West Asian people, the better policies they will pursue. And so we need to have, it is good for us to have BRICS countries siding with the Palestinian cause. It is good for BRICS countries to side with the people of Lebanon and Syria and the countries that are surrounding Palestine. And one way of doing that is to help develop the north-south transport corridor between Iran and Russia.
Right.
or the Belt and Road Initiative, that part of it goes through Iran. That's necessary. And of course, the Americans would love to undermine that, and so would the Israeli regime. But it sort of links, it sort of serves as a hyperlink to remind us about the 12-day war. Why not continue the war?
Right.
Because you also have other issues that you want to, like, you have to keep in mind in the pursuit of liberation across West Asia.
Yeah, and it also gets back to, I don't even know if I mentioned my second point as to why Iran may not pursue a nuclear weapon, because we throw around this word deterrence all of the time. And this point that Patrick is making, that I've made on this show many times, is there's no deterring this. Russia and China are nuclear powers, and the United States is pursuing a war with these countries. And it's a regime change war. Whether it's a pipe dream or not, it doesn't really matter. It's happening. Ukraine was literally conducted and sparked as a regime change war on Russia. So while I don't necessarily think it's definitely don't necessarily disagree with the majority of Iranian people who may stand opposed to you, Professor Marandi. Now you are not, you are not an agent of the Iranian government or the Iranian people, even in this respect. But at the same time, there really is this project of a multipolarity where Iran fits into it as a real leader. There is no arresting the U.S.'s desire to get rid of this, and that's why it's so important to ensure that we are creating alternatives and putting out there that this is happening, because ultimately it'll be resistance in all of its forms from the global south, and the support, as you said, solidarity from the West, that will stop this. But you're not going to change the minds of the people who sit in Washington. The people who sit in Washington, they don't look at Russia's 10,000 nuclear weapons and say, maybe we shouldn't wage a war on Ukraine. Maybe we shouldn't allow them to strike long distance into Russia. They don't think that way. They think, how far can we go before we get to this point where the entire all of humanity on this planet is at risk? That's how I see it. That's how I see it. It may not be the most cheery outlook, but there's nothing cheery about those who rule over the empire. The optimism comes from those trying to build an alternative to it. Any final comments, though, as I put up super chats that people provided for support?
Danny, when I was a kid, I'm not a supporter of violent sports or anything like that. I don't like war, and I don't like violent sports either. But I was growing up as a young kid during the later years of Muhammad Ali as a professional boxer. And my parents were big fans of his because he was like, they were politically aware, and he was like anti-Vietnam, against the Vietnam War. And of course, by the mid 1970s, that the Vietnam War was over, and the mood in the United States had changed. But in any case, my parents were big fans of his, so I had an interest in him. I had a poster of him in my in my room, my bedroom, as a child, and I am not quite sure if I actually saw uh, the um, his fight with Foreman. I've seen it multiple times, but I don't watch boxing, but I've seen this multiple times. And in that fight, he was the underdog, and he was supposed to lose. He was much older, and he hadn't fought for years, and out because of Vietnam, and because of that, he was no longer as good as he was before he was forced from to stop boxing. But in this fight, the Rumble in the Jungle, as it was called, he outsmarted Foreman. He was a brilliant man, very smart, very he didn't have an education, but he was brilliant. Uh, and he outsmarted him, and he started, you know, using what he later called rope-a-dope.
Right.
And he would, he allowed Foreman to punch himself out, and he would provoke Foreman to do that. So, a brilliant man. He was supposed to lose, but he won decisively in 8 rounds. He didn't win he won decisively. And I think that the axis of resistance knows what it's doing. And the axis of resistance is wearing out the enemy. And the United States government, which is the enemy, and it's not the American people. We've heard, I think, the president speak about, why do they say death to the United States? It's like Yankee go home.
Yeah.
When they say Yankee go home, they're not talking about any American passport holder. You leave the country because they're talking about the regime in Washington.
Yeah.
So death to America is basically death to the empire. Otherwise, Iran has no problems with Brazil. It has no problems with Bolivia. It has no problems with, it's just the United States and those countries that serve it or work with it closely, whether it's in our region or with, the NATO members or, wherever in the world they are.
Yeah.
But the point is that the United States government is the enemy. In the United States, Iran and Global South has forced it to overextend itself. In Ukraine, the trade wars, and now we see, in Palestine with Iran, this is not sustainable. So the Americans may want to wage war against, and they're waging wars against the world. And at the same time, there's a crisis of legitimacy at home, such as with Epstein. And there is an economic crisis that is, it is growing and growing, and people, regardless of what the mainstream media is saying, people see what's going on in the United States and what's happening with the economy in Europe. And of course, it's a global problem too. But these countries, they are going down. So I don't think that the United States can continue with this forever. And the fact that it has overextended itself is hubris. It comes from this exceptionalism, this sense of exceptionalism that they have. And I think this will ultimately bring about its downfall. We live in very dangerous times. It is a dark world that we live in, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we have to be optimistic, and we have to be dedicated, and we have to keep pushing, and we have to open our eyes. Those who are willfully closing their eyes to certain things, which I alluded to earlier in our discussion, though, they have to open their eyes. They have a responsibility to open their eyes. They made many mistakes. They made many mistakes in Syria. They caused huge damage, irreversible damage, but they have to make up for it. But in any case, or those who in the past supported Israel and now they've changed. We all have to, we have to open our eyes and move in the right direction. I am optimistic about the future, but that doesn't mean that there are not dark days and months, weeks and months ahead. I think there will be another war with Iran. I think they will attack Iran again. They will murder Iranians. They will target women and children. But we have to see this through. And we have to stop the Holocaust. And that is what Hezbollah has been trying to do. That is what Ansarullah has been trying to do. That's what the Axis of Resistance has been trying to do. And that is what we all have to do across the world in our own way, through creating awareness, through putting pressure on governments. We have to put pressure on governments in this region to end their ties with Israel. I mean, as long as Turkey has such good ties with Israel, trade, business, trust, how can we expect African countries to break off ties? How can we expect Latin American countries to break off ties when none of the countries, when Egypt, when Jordan, when the Emirates, when Morocco? So there's a lot of work that we all have to do, online, offline, in our different countries, peacefully, through protest, through creating awareness. There's a lot that we have to do, but I am optimistic. Remember, after October the 7th, the narrative of the West was pushing for the lies about rape and what was it, beheadings and all that. And they did that for months. All those narratives have collapsed. Everything is falling apart for them. So I remember I remember during the first few months, I said this before on your show. There was this woman in South Korea. Every day she would go in front of the Israeli embassy and protest. One lone woman. Well, look now, across the world, the mood has changed. So there's reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, and your point, and we can end on here. Your very good point about the need for countries in the region to break off ties with Israel before we can expect anyone else to. It's a very good point, because I always hear, how about China? Why doesn't China? Why doesn't Russia?
Yeah, why should they?
But that's
If these
yeah.
countries won't do it, why should we expect anyone else to do it?
But also,
In fact, these governments are impeding.
Yep.
They are impeding the move to isolate the Israeli regime by making money through their business transactions.
Yeah. Economic integration is and then that's what people understand. Supply chains, integration, these, just pure economics. It is very difficult to quote unquote break and do blockades if the people themselves and the countries themselves where that demand needs to be the strongest and where that reality needs to be borne out that's not the case. And it is in some ways there's morals and principles that we have, but realities and facts on the ground are also very important. And until there is these really what could be powerful countries, and I don't really consider them powerful right now, Turkey, these Gulf regimes, they could be, but they're not influential. They're not powerful because they do the bidding of US empire. But if they are going to do that, it is very difficult. It is very difficult to expect anyone. And this is historical too, because never have we seen. I think some people hope that there will be like a great savior of the Palestinian people. There'll be a great savior of a region that has been so torn apart by empire and the West. But at the same time, all successful Iran itself, if we want to consider that as an example, it's not outsiders that came and I was like, oh, we're gonna pull you out of your subjugated position. No, usually it comes from the people themselves first, and then whatever support they receive, like we see with the Axis of Resistance, that is mediated and is dictated by far more things than just principles. It's realities. Can you give that support? How do you give that support? What are all the considerations? It's so important to understand that those who reside in the West, those who reside in the U.S., as you say here often, Professor Marandi, the responsibility is big because that is where the big issue is. It's in the policies of the U.S. It's in the policies of the West that keep things like, if tomorrow the U.S. tapped Turkey on the shoulder and said, "Don't do this," it would happen. But that doesn't occur because the U.S. is fully committed to the Zionist project, because the U.S. is fully committed to its own project of dominance, and it sees it as one and the same. But Professor Marandi, we can end here. Any final words before we head out?
Not really. I'm just
I've kept you a while.
grateful for the opportunity to speak, and we should always remember that the Holocaust in Gaza is going on, is continuing as we speak. And after I go to bed, while I'm asleep, it's going to continue. And then at night, later on, when you go to sleep, it's continuing.
Yep.
And the next morning, it will continue. And we all have to do whatever possible to bring an end to it.
Indeed. All right, everybody, hit that like button before you head out. That will keep the video going. More people hearing Professor Marandi and what he had to say today on the show going. I'll be back next week, likely Tuesday, with I think it's Pepe Escobar and many other guests. I think it's actually a big show. So stay tuned for that. Without further ado, take care, everyone. Goodbye. See you again soon.